Hi, my name is Karen, and I'm an American lay student of Ajahn Suchat, or Pra Ajahn Suchat Abhijato, who has given me the very special honor of being asked by him to record this book for you. This book was written by Pra Ajahn Suchat's own teacher, the Venerable Acariya Maha Boowa Nanasampanno, and is a spiritual biography written by him about his teacher, the Venerable Acariya Mun Buddhadatta Thera. The title of the book is Venerable Acariya Mun Buddhadatta Thera, a spiritual biography by Acariya Mahabhuwa Nanasampanno, and it was published in 2005, translated into English by Bhikkhu Dick Silaratano. If you would like to learn how to download or get a hard copy of this book, or a list of which pages or chapters are read on each separate recording, please listen to the beginning of the first recording of this book. This book, in any form, is to be given away for free. Any ads you may see or hear in this recording have been put there by the platform you are using to listen or view with, for its own revenue, in exchange for letting us use their platform for free. Please forgive me for any mispronunciations of names, places, or words, as I'm still learning how to pronounce Thai and Pali, and for any background noises, as I'm just making these recordings in my apartment with an unruly dog and in the middle of a city. We're resuming today on page 125. We are still in the section titled The Well Digging Incident and still in chapter 2. Acariya Mun's teaching for the monks was thoroughly meticulous, showing great attention to detail. The rules of monastic discipline were taught in detail, and samadhi and wisdom belonging to the higher Dhamma were taught in even greater depth. During the time he lived in Sarika cave, he had already begun to master all levels of samadhi and all intermediate levels of wisdom. As for the highest levels of wisdom, I shall write about them later in the story, when Acariya Mun's practice finally reached that stage. After continuing his training in the northeast region for a while longer, he became even more proficient. This enabled him to use his expertise to teach the monks about all levels of samadhi, plus the intermediate levels of wisdom. They in turn listened intently to his expositions, which never deviated from the authentic principles of samadhi and wisdom. Acariya Mun's samadhi was strange and quite extraordinary, whether it was Khanika samadhi, Upachara samadhi, or Appana samadhi. When his chitta entered into Khanika samadhi, it remained only for a moment, and instead of returning to its normal state, it then withdrew and entered Upachara samadhi. In that state, he came into contact with a countless variety of external phenomena. Sometimes he was involved with ghosts, sometimes devas, sometimes nagas. Innumerable worlds of existence were contacted by this type of samadhi. It was this access level samadhi that Acariya Mun used to receive visitors whose forms were invisible to normal sight and whose voices were inaudible to normal hearing. Sometimes his chitta floated up out of his body and went off to look at the heavenly realms and the different levels of the Brahma world. Then it traveled down into the regions of hell to look at the multitude of beings tormented by the results of their own karma. The terms going up and going down are relative, conventional figures of speech, referring to the behavior of gross physical bodies. They have very little in common with the behavior of the chitta, which is something so subtle that it is beyond temporal comparison. In terms of the physical body, going up and going down require a degree of earnest effort. But in terms of the chitta, they are merely figures of speech with no degree of effort involved. When we say that the heavens, the Brahma realms, and Nibbana are progressively higher and more refined levels of existence, or that the realms of hell consist of progressively lower levels of existence, we are in fact using a physical, material standard to measure that which exists in a spiritual, psychic dimension. We might say that hell and heaven, which are considered to be lower and higher respectively, are in some respects analogous to hardened criminals and petty offenders who live together in the same prison, which itself is located in a community of law-abiding citizens. There's no distinction in kind between the two types of prisoners because they all live together in the same prison. And there's no distinction in kind between them and law-abiding citizens because they are all human beings living on the same land in the same country. What distinguishes them is the fact that they've been kept separated. At least the prison inmates and the general public can use their normal sense faculties to be aware of each other. But beings in the different spheres of existence are unaware of each other. Those living in the hell realms are unable to perceive those who are in the heavenly realms, and vice versa. Both groups are unable to perceive the Brahma world. And human beings, in turn, are unaware of all who are in these different realms of existence. Even though the flows of consciousness from each of these beings intermingle constantly as they pass through one another's sphere of existence, they are as oblivious of others as if theirs is the only group in existence. Ordinarily, our minds are unable to know the thoughts of others. Because of this inability, we might then reason that they do not really exist. No matter how persistent these denials might be, we would be wrong, because all living beings possess a mind. Even though we are not aware of the thoughts of other beings, we have no right to deny that they exist simply because we can't perceive them. We cannot afford to hold hostage, within the limitations of our sense faculties, the existence of things which are too subtle to see and hear. If we do, we are just fooling ourselves. When we say that the heavens and the Brahma worlds are arranged vertically in a series of realms, one shouldn't understand this in the gross material sense, such as a house with many stories requiring the use of stairs or an elevator. These realms exist in a spiritual dimension, and they are ascended in the spiritual sense by spiritual means. That is, by the heart which has developed this sort of capability through the practice of virtue. When we say that hell is down below, this does not mean descending into an abyss. Rather, it refers to descent by spiritual means, to a spiritual destination. And those who are able to observe the hell realms do so by virtue of their own internal psychic faculties. But those beings who fall into these realms do so through the power of their own evil karma. They remain there, experiencing whatever torment and agony is imposed on them by their own misdeeds, until they have completed their punishment and are released, in the same way that prison inmates are released at the end of their sentences. From the very beginning of Acariya Mun's practice, Upachara Samadhi and Khanika Samadhi were bound together because the nature of his citta was inherently active and adventurous. As soon as his citta entered Khanika Samadhi, it instantly began to roam and experience the different phenomena existing in the sphere of Upachara. So he trained himself in Samadhi until he was proficient enough to make his citta stay still or go out to experience various phenomena as he wished. From then on, it was easy for him to practice the Samadhi of his choice. For instance, he could enter momentarily into Khanika Samadhi and then move out to access Samadhi in order to experience various phenomena, or he could focus intensively and enter into the full absorption of Appana Samadhi, where he would rest for as long as necessary. Appana Samadhi is a state of perfect calm that's absolutely serene and peaceful. Because of this, meditators may become attached to it. Acariya Mun said that he was attached to this type of samadhi for a while, but not for long, since he was by nature inclined toward wisdom. So he was able to resolve this matter himself and find a way out before complacency set in. Anyone who is transfixed in appana samadhi will make slow progress if they do not try to apply wisdom to examine it. Because it fills one with such happiness, many meditators are held fast by this type of samadhi. A strong, lingering attachment forms, and the meditator yearns for more, overwhelming any inclination to examine things with wisdom, which is the way to eradicate all kilesas. Meditators who fail to receive timely advice from a wise person will be reluctant to disengage themselves and realize the path of wisdom. When the citta remains attached for a long time in such samadhi, conceits of various kinds may develop, such as believing that this calm and happy state is none other than nibbana, the end of dukkha. In truth, when the citta converges into the one-pointedness of appana samadhi so that its focal point is experienced with the utmost clarity, it dwells fully absorbed in serene happiness. But the kilesas that cause birth in all realms of existence simultaneously converge at the same focal point as well. If wisdom is not used to penetrate and destroy these kilesas, there is no doubt that future rebirths will take place. Therefore, regardless of the level of samadhi one practices, wisdom should be incorporated into the practice as well. This is especially true of appana samadhi. Otherwise, the citta will only experience tranquility without evincing a capacity for resourcefulness and discernment. By the time of his second trip to the Northeast, Acariya Mun was well experienced in the intermediate level of wisdom, since sufficient wisdom is necessary for having advanced to the anagami level of Dhamma. Otherwise, he would not have been capable of effective investigation at that level. Before reaching that level, one must employ wisdom to successfully pass through body contemplation. This requires seeing the attractive as well as the repulsive aspects of the body without getting caught up in either extreme. The citta uses wisdom to isolate the attractive and repulsive aspects, and then passes through the midpoint where these two extremes meet, having resolved all doubt and attachment concerning the body. This passage, however, is nothing more than a transitional stage along the way. It is analogous to taking an examination and passing with the minimum requirement, necessitating further study to achieve the maximum grade. Those who have penetrated to the anagami level of understanding must still train their wisdom until it reaches an even more refined degree of expertise before it can be said that they are full-fledged anagamis. Should such a person then die, he would immediately be reborn in the fifth or akanita plane of the Brahma world without having to pass through the four lower Brahma planes. Acariya Mun recounted how he was delayed at that level for quite some time because he had no one to advise him. As he struggled to familiarize himself with the anagami level of practice, he had to be very careful not to make any mistakes. He knew from his experience in analyzing subtle aspects of Dhamma that the kilesas might undermine his efforts, for they were as equally subtle as the mindfulness and wisdom he was using to counter them. This made it very difficult to penetrate each successive level of Dhamma. He said it was absolutely incredible how hard he struggled to negotiate that dense, thorny thicket. Before he made his way through to come and kindly teach the rest of us, he suffered great hardship, making the arduous journey all alone. When the occasion was right, he used to describe this part of his practice to us. I myself was moved to tears in 2 instances while listening to his description of the terrible ordeal he faced at that time, and the amazingly subtle and profound nature of the Dhamma he attained. I wondered whether I had enough inherent virtue to enable me to crawl along in his footsteps, or whether I was destined to go the way of ordinary people in the world. But his words were very encouraging, and always helped to sustain my resolve to persevere. Acariya said that whenever he accelerated his efforts to apply wisdom, his citta became weary of association with others, and he became even more committed to his meditation practice. He knew at that stage that his practice still needed strengthening, yet he felt obliged to stay and train his disciples so that they might also develop some Dhamma principles in their hearts. Acariya lived for 3 or 4 years in the area of Nanasampanno village in Sri Srangkram district, Nanasampanno province. He spent 1 year at Ban Huai Sai village in Kamchai district of the same province, as well as the villages of Nang Sung and Kok Klang. He particularly liked staying in those places since they were all very mountainous. Nearby, in the Pakuk Mountains, there were many devas, and tigers there were particularly abundant. When night descended, tigers would wander around his living area, while the devas came to rejoice in hearing the Dhamma. In the middle of the night, the roars of huge tigers echoed through the forest close to where he lived. On some nights, a whole host of them roared together, much like a crowd of people yelling back and forth to one another. When the terrifying sounds of those enormous cats resounded through the darkness, the effect was indeed very frightening. There were nights when the monks and novices failed to get any sleep, fearing that the tigers would come to snatch and devour them. Acariya cleverly found ways to use their fear of tigers to spur the monks to practice diligently. Rather enigmatically, he would say, "Anyone whose efforts are lazy, watch out. The tigers in this mountain range really love lazy monks. They find them especially tasty eating. So if you want to avoid becoming a tasty meal for a tiger, you had better be diligent. You see, tigers are actually afraid of anyone who's diligently striving, so they won't eat that person." After hearing this, all the monks redoubled their efforts as though their very lives depended on it. They forced themselves to go out and do walking meditation, despite the roar of tigers all around the vicinity. Although they remained afraid, they believed what Acariya told them, that lazy monks could expect to be a tiger's next meal. This precarious situation was made even worse by the fact that they didn't have huts, as they would in a monastery, only small platforms just big enough to sleep on, which were very low to the ground. If a tiger became hungry, there'd be no contest. Acariya related that on some nights, huge tigers wandered into the monks' area, but then simply walked harmlessly past. He knew that tigers normally would not dare do anything, for the devas were always on guard. When devas came for a Dhamma talk, they mentioned to him that they were protecting the area and would not let anything trouble the monks or cause them harm. Those devas also invited Acariya to remain in the area for a long time. In truth, Acariya admonition to the monks was simply a means of arousing fear so that they would take an increased interest in their practice. As for the tigers, they seemed to know that the monks' living area was a safe haven. Various kinds of wild animals, too, felt no need to be wary of hunters entering the monks' vicinity, for when the villagers knew where Acariya was staying, they rarely dared to hunt the area. They were concerned about the dreadful moral consequences. They were terrified that if anyone shot a gun in that area, it would explode in his hands and kill him. Strangely enough, whenever he went to stay in an area teeming with tigers, those beasts would stop killing the domesticated cows and buffaloes around the local villages. Nobody knew where they went to obtain their food. These remarkable incidents were related by Acariya himself, and later confirmed by many villagers in those localities where he had stayed. And we're going to go ahead and end there today. We are on page 131. We just finished the section titled The Well Digging Incident. We are still in chapter 2, and we will continue in the next recording at the very beginning of the next section, which is the last section in chapter 2, titled An Impeccable Human Being. Until then, with metta. Bye-bye.